Hello, Jay, and welcome to Those Who Give a Damn podcast. I am super excited to have you here today. I am so excited. I have been watching your journey across social media, reading about you here in Washington. And so I thought, okay, let me get you on to the show. As you are aware, across the country, many have tried to turn the issue of trans rights into a political issue. It has been a hot topic, and I wanted to give it a platform today on my podcast. As a, Black gay man, I thought, okay, it's time for me to really bring this to the podcast and have a conversation. And I believe, and I have used this platform, Jay, to elevate young and upcoming voices. I call them rising voices of change, right? You all are changing the landscape of our world and our society. And so I am so excited to have you on, and welcome to Those Who Give a Damn podcast.
Thank you, and I'm so excited to be here.
So I'm going to jump right in. Let's start by addressing the national conversation on trans rights. Can you share, in your own words, while protecting trans rights is critical, and not just for the trans community, but for society as a whole?
Yeah, I think it's been interesting, especially how we watched the conversation shift in terms of in this last year, how we've talked about, how we conversed about in the conversations we've had about trans body and trans people. Specifically, I think this national election did a lot to tell us and to show us specifically where trans issues are in modern history. And to give people a little bit of a breakdown and a little bit of this conversation, I think these past 4 years, we to some extent have watched transness become a little bit more acclimated into society. It wasn't as much as a hot topic as some would have liked it to be. It wasn't as much conversed about. It wasn't that much a taboo subject. Quite literally in the matter of months, I think what we have witnessed and we have watched from this national election is how transness has been weaponized, how it has been terrorized, and how it has been literally used a us versus them to create that kind of mentality. Specifically, I think we witnessed this as a kind of unifier amongst white bodies and white people, specifically the Republican and GOP legislation, to be able to kind of unionize white people and to kind of say, look, right, here are the monsters, here are the people here are the people we should be attacking to divert the conversation from the real subject and matter at hand. And I think this isn't the first time that we've witnessed this, right? Trans has always, quote unquote, been a taboo subject. And it's always been a very kind of easy person or easy group to kind of create this them mentality. It's interesting though, as we're beginning to watch the Trump administration, a GOP dominated House and Senate, both chambers of Congress. It's interesting to watch Democrats and how Democratic lawmakers and legislation will begin to affect. I think, right, we recently just have seen how the military bill that was just passed through the Senate, that had aspects of anti-trans rhetoric and gender and lack of gender affirming care in there, right? Like I said, it's not this important just to watch Republicans in this moment. It's important to watch Democrats and how easily they fold. I'll end it with this because I always think it's important. Every society is measured to some extent off of how they treat their most vulnerable populations. And I think that's important because it's important to know how is the most vulnerable people of our society consistently treated, constantly documented. What are the barriers and aspects that they have to be overlooking and kind of having to go over? And that to me tells me everything I need to know about America, about the UK, about Australia, or wherever.
Wow, that's powerful. Let me ask you this. What do you see the role student leaders like yourself play in pushing back against these harmful policies and fostering a more inclusive society? Because to your point, we have to watch what Democrats are doing, but we do know that the people who are in power, Jay, let's just be honest, those people, what are the average age in Congress, right? They're over 60, right? So they could very well be out of touch with society. We know that politicians also play politics with whatever is popular during that time, whatever it is for them to get in the majority. And like most politicians, when they get in, they then sway based on the public opinion. I want to know, what do you see the role of student leaders like yourself, young people? Speak to those young people tonight to be able to get into the movement, because I truly believe you all are going to be the ones to make the difference.
Yeah, I think, right, we're starting to get at an interesting time in American history where the old vanguard, this can be documented. I study political science. And so this can be documented, right? multiple times throughout history. We are at a crucial shift right now in American politics where the old vanguard is still trying to hold on to power, right? The new vanguard is trying to come in and is trying to make their way with their policies and what they believe are the things that they think the party should be going, right? These are people like the AOCs, the tech, well, High King Jeffries is kind of in the middle, but the High King Jeffries, right? The new leaders of the party. Where young people, especially college educated, not even necessarily college educated, I will say this collegiate level people aged right 18 to 24. The movement has always been within those age. I'm going to go back to the Black community for a second, right? When we look towards the 1960s and 1950s, right? A lot of the work that was done by things like the Montgomery bus boycott was done by SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which was based and done on college campuses, right? Collegiate campuses specifically have always been crucial in pushing movements. If I was to put this together in a more modern time, right, I'll go to Howard's history as an example. Presidents, specifically SGA presidents, have played incremental roles during different legislative bodies. And I'll use as an example Kylie Burke, who was the 61st Howard University Student Association executive president. She was actually called to testify to Congress about the bomb threats that Howard University was receiving at that time, right? When we're talking about change and when we're talking about the people who are bringing forth the change, right, it is typically the people at this level because typically younger people have nothing to lose and everything to gain. And there's something to note in that moment. When you become more established and the older you become, the more established you are, the more you have to lose, the more connections you can lose, the more money you can lose, the more power you can lose. When you are younger, you have nothing to lose. You're just starting out in the game, you're just getting into this. And because of that mentality, young people, especially on HBCU communities and campuses, have always played incremental roles in that, not just because they have something to lose, but because they also have the imagination to dream, right? When you're younger, that imagination hasn't necessarily been killed yet. And there's something still powerful in having the imagination to dream that is incremental and instrumental in creating powerful movements that have been the pushing needle that have created real change in this country.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this. As you were, thinking about the marginalized in our community, where do you see young people entering into politics, and particularly a representative of the LGBTQ plus community? We saw in this last election that people were, talking about, oh, we're too woke, or the Democratic Party is just too far gone with these issues. We saw that a lot of people from the LGBTQ plus community was elected in state, right, and federal seats across the country. And so there seems to be a disconnect, of course, with the establishment and the younger generation, which you just spoke to. But how do you see or encourage young people like yourself to get involved? I feel like, to your point, you've already started your political journey as a student body president at Howard University. And we've only been in this conversation just a little while. And if you were running for Congress, I would vote for you, right? Like, I would vote for you. So I want you to, tell us, where do you see the next generation and encourage them to get involved? So many times we wait, we're told, wait our turn, it's not your turn. They're not going to elect, trans person to the, federal seat, or they're not going to do this. Talk to them tonight for me.
I think two things. I think just as important as it is for people to be running in these seats, it's just as important for people to be bureaucrats. When I say bureaucrats, I mean people in places of leadership within places like the DNC, within places like a lot of these political caucuses whose job it is to recruit, train, and lead the next group of people who are supposed to be there, right? When we're looking typically at these ages, at these people who are leading a lot of these political groups, right? They are not focusing, or their strategy, so to say, and when it comes down to recruiting and training, is not focused on trying to build better pipelines of people out of college or while they're in college. There's not a focus there, right? They have focused on people who are established. They have focused on people who have their JDs. They have focused on people who have MBAs, who have all these higher levels of education. And when we come down to it, right, I don't care what anyone wants to say, right? I don't care if anyone wants to say it's because we're too woke, the DNC is too woke, it's because this, it's because that. It's not because of any of that. That wasn't the reason why the Democrats lost multiple different elections. It's because the DNC has moved too far away from people. And that was one of the main complaints when it came down to it. when it came down to breaking down some of these complex and high intellectual subject items into smaller compartmentalized things, the DNC failed every single time. It came down to tariffs, couldn't do it. It came down to taxes, it couldn't do it. It came down to explaining, right, why we should be talking about LGBTQIA rights, why we should be talking about healthcare in this way, why it's an important legal subject for you and your privacy, whether you are Republican, Democrat, Independent. But instead, right, the messaging is what has gotten off. And that's where we've noticed that there is a problem. And I think, right, when it comes down to younger people and having this conversation, I think people like AOC have shown us really great and someone who's received national attention, someone who was consistently and constantly told, oh, like she won't make it past her first term in Congress. Here she is. She won't do da da da. She has been a really good example of, I think, showing people that this is possible, this is feasible, and this can be done. And I think that's important to know. I really do. And so moving forward, I think for young people, especially for young people, when it comes down to engaging in these national elections, when it comes down to engaging in federal elections, state elections, there is no level that is too high for you to start out at, right? Maybe instead of trying to go for a state and federal seat, how about you start at your local city council seat, something that can be accomplished while you're still in school. There was, I forget, his name was Taylor. He was the Mr. Texas Southern University at Texas. He was also in the time that he was there, he was a school board member for the Houston Independent School District, right? And I think that goes to show the power, right, that HBCU students have, but people more importantly have when they're in these positions. There was the 50, I believe it's the 57th administration's president for Howard University. She not only was the president of HUSA, but she also served in DC as a advisory neighborhood commissioner. She was on the ANC board. And so, right, that brings in different conversations. It brings in different aspects when it comes down to politics and being involved, because there is no level, right, that is too little for you to start at. There isn't one.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just couldn't have you on without talking about your historic win. You know, you are the first openly trans student body president at Howard University. And congratulations to you, right? And so excited for you. Can you share what this moments mean to you personally and for the LGBTQ plus community at Howard University, and not just Howard University, but around the world?
Yeah. I think right when it first happened, and I always tell people this is when it first happened, it was I never thought I was making history. I never thought I was doing anything along those lines. I just simply said I'm doing my job, right? And my job has always been at the first and foremost in priority than serving the student body. I started out not just at Howard University as a president, right? I was the 63rd Howard University Student Association executive vice president. I was a chief of staff, a campaign manager. I worked my way up, so to say, I guess, in Howard politics. To be able to get to the moment when people started telling me, oh, like you were you were the first woman of trans experience to be able to achieve this high of an office, not just at Howard University, but the first president of any HBCU that we've had. I said, oh my God, like, that's good. And so it was kind of like a mesmerizing moment. But I think right for Howard, and I think that this is the conversation sometimes that gets diluted when we're talking about HBCUs, which is that Howard has always been different microism of an HBCU experience than other ones. And I say that because, right, we're located in Washington, D.C. So when it comes down to things, right, like the LGBTQIA community, or when it comes down to having those conversations, right, Howard University has kind of been a little bit more accelerated than some of our HBCU counterparts, right? But I always like to say I don't think that when it comes down to like being the first, right? I come from a legacy of trailblazers who were able to do it before I was. People like Victoria Kirby became the first ever queer person to serve on our board of trustees, right? We have people like Christopher Cross, who was then like the first ever gay person to be able to get male to be able to serve on our board of trustees.
Yeah, I know Christopher. Yeah, sorry, no Christopher.
And I think, right, having the opportunity to follow behind a legacy like that and to continue doing our work at Howard University, not just accelerating it forward, but making it a most inclusive and embracing place for all people of all walks of life, of all cultures, has been something I think of the student body that has been our main mission. And I think we completed and we've continued and we wanted to witness continuing that for just years to come. But it's remarkable. And it's amazing, especially when you do a little bit of history of backtracking the legacy that you come from and knowing that you're not standing alone, but that there were all of these Howard people who were able to do it before you were. I think just helps you a little bit more to stand up, especially in moments where it's been hard. Because it definitely, right, for all the moments, I guess, of glory that's gotten, there's also been a lot of moments of hate. There's been a lot of moments of, I don't understand this, a lot of moments of ignorance. And so it's good to be able to have that support system to lean back on.
Absolutely. I want you, before we go into our complete the sentence sec, you alluded to, like people saying, I don't understand this, the challenges. I want you to just take a few moments and speak to my audience and educate them around what does it mean to understand and embrace trans rights, right? I know we kind of open up with it, but I just want you to kind of share your heart as a young person who is, in college. I want you to speak to our community about what does it mean. Educate them if you could in whatever way you want to.
When I think of, right, women of trans experience, men of trans experience, when I think of, right, the trans experience as a whole, I think of it as one of the most unique experiences here in the United States, but just internationally, period. I say it's a unique experience because when it comes down to one of the main things that I look at the human world to need, that everyone as a human needs to be able to galvanize and get behind, right? It's always been empathy. Or when you have beginning into this experience of transness, the conversation around empathy changes a lot, right? Because you now are, I guess, so to say, considered to this level of being at the bottom of the totem pole, right? You're disrespected by straight men, you're disrespected by gay men, right? You're disrespected by black men, you're disrespected by white men, you're disrespected by, right, like regular, you're disrespected by cisgender women. And then of course there's still a little bit of hate within the trans, like women of the community as well, right? So when I think about it, right, empathy is, I think, at the most corners and at the corner of what we talk about when we're having the conversation around the trans experience. Because one of the things that I've noticed is that when you meet people who come from the trans experience, when you meet people who come, one of the things that they have consistently seen, or one of the things you consistently notice, especially about like people who were in this trans experience, right, and they've in these different scenes, the ballroom scene, the fashion scene, there's different aspects, right, is the amount of love they have for people. Right? They take you in regardless. They don't know your story. They don't know where you came from, right? But we want to provide this experience that we didn't get to have. And I think sometimes that it's important to note that, but I think sometimes a lot of people forget that, right? They're so focused on this aspect of them transitioning. They're so out focused on these aspects, right? Of like, oh, what, like this and this and this, that they forget at the end of the day, right? Like each person who comes from trans experience has a story, right? They had something that, right, like you genuinely just don't know about. Sometimes it's important to note that because we forget sometimes, right, about the stories of people and the stories that live within them. I was having a conversation with some older trans women, Black trans women, and they were just going through and kind of saying, like, where the world used to be in terms of acceptance, embracing what it looked like, what it meant. And sometimes, right, we forget to sit down, and I think this is humankind, period, but we forget to sit down and hear the story that people have. So for me, right, when I think of transness, right, I sum it down to activists, right? I think a creator, I think of an innovator, I think of one of a kind, I think of unique, I think of beautiful, I think all of these different things that the world tells us we can't be, we are. But most importantly, I think of a survivor and a thriver, because we consistently survive in a world that tells us that we can't, and we thrive in a society that continuously tries to kill us.
Wow, that's powerful, Jay. That's powerful. Wow, wow, wow. Amazing. So, Jay, before we wrap, we're going to play my complete the sentence segment, and I love these. So I'll start the sentence, and you'll give me the first thing that come to mind.
Okay.
Leadership is about.
Service.
Awesome. The one thing I wish people understood about the trans community is
Is it only one word, or is it just finish the sentence?
whatever come to mind. I'll repeat it. Let me repeat it, Jay.
Okay.
So the one thing I wish people understood about the trans community is
That we are not your enemy.
powerful. Howard University represents.
Community.
If I could change one thing about politics today, it would be
The amount of young people who have access to be able to run.
powerful. In 5 years, I see myself.
Happy.
And lastly, my message to the incoming administration is?
To find joy in the little moments and to remember that you're never in this alone.
Awesome. Powerful. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really, really appreciate your time. Happy holidays to you. Thank you so much for being here and just really for paving the way in leadership and to really educating my audience and the world around trans rights and your community, which is my community, which is all of our community, because we are, like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, we are a beloved community. And when we're all in community together, thrive and we do great. So thank you. And your future is absolutely amazingly bright. Thank you again for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.